What do you have against him, Hardcastle?
He's an alien. He has no allegiance, no jurisdiction. I don't trust what I can't control, Hamilton, and I don't like what I can't trust.
Emil, you'd better get over here.
What's the problem?
You have to see this for yourself.
My heavens. The creature's body temperature is rising.
Superman! It's coming to life!
And all journalists know that there's some things you don't write about and you don't talk about because you'll lose your job. And that's where the control is. And that's why they pay anchormen like Dan Rather $2 million a year. Because he doesn't question them. He knows that if he goes against them, he's going to lose $2 million a year. Do you think a man that looks pretty and sits in front of a TV camera for the 6 o'clock news is worth $2 million a year? No way. I don't care how long he works and I don't care what he does. There is no job worth $2 million a year. That's why they pay athletes these fantastic salaries. I was listening to the radio the other day. They just contracted to pay one player on one team $6 million a year. Can you believe this?
And why is that?
It's the Roman circus. What does the emperor do when the people become restive? And when the people are asking questions, and when the people don't like the policies of the emperor, he sends them to the circus. He creates a circus. He builds a giant coliseum. And he begins to throw the Christians to the lions. And he has great chariot races, and football games, and basketball games, all to keep the idiots preoccupied with things that don't mean anything in the scheme of the entire world. So that they don't have the time to learn what the truth is. So they don't ever get smart enough to learn how they're being manipulated. So they don't ever question the emperor. That's why they pay a player on a football team or a baseball team $1 million or $2 million or $3 million a year. It is the Roman circus. I know men who don't know anything in the world except who plays third base for the Mets. And they think that's a great accomplishment. And they meet and pat each other on the back and bond and go have cocktails and talk about what this guy that plays third base for the Mets did in last night's game. It's sad. It's really sad.
Is there any room in a kind of society where these manipulations are not taking place for this type of entertainment or any type of entertainment at all?
If people understand that a game is a game, if people understand that nobody, no matter what they do, is worth paying $2 or $3 million a year for, people should be able to get rich if they want to, by the sweat of their individual labor, okay? By going out and doing something for the world. Not by taking people's minds away from the emperor. It's a game. Football's a game. Football's a game. But let me tell you something. When 150 of the most powerful men and women in the world can meet in secret in Baden-Baden, Germany, and plot the fate of billions, and nobody even cares about it, but 6 football players go to lunch together, and it's in the headlines across the country, you have a reflection of the society in which that exists. And it is a sick society that is doomed to self-destruction.
So based on that scenario, there's some truth into what these men are looking at.
Absolutely, and that's what makes me so sick, is that I'm trying to wake up a people who on a daily basis are proving the ones that I'm warning them about to be right.
Well, so that even though a minority, there are people out there that you recognize are awake to this, if they don't do something about it, they will lose that ability to be free in that way.
That's correct.
Whether they might think, well, I don't need to worry about it because I know what I know and I'm fine.
That's
it doesn't
right.
work that way. There's a connection here to everything.
That is correct.
I bowled a game last year that was 1 point less than the world championship bowler's high score when he won the championship tournament. Okay? I love the bowl. It puts me in a focused, nice mood. Like I have a good time at the lanes, right? I could be, if I practice, I don't even practice. I threw a game 1 point less than the world champion. And I don't even practice. If I went and started practicing every week, I could do that every time I bowled, and I could be the world championship bowler. I'm not even bragging. I'm telling you. I'll put at some point in a future podcast, I'll put my scoreboard. I took a picture of it, and you can compare that to the world champion that year. He threw a 265 to win the game, and I threw a 264. Okay, so the whole point is, if I really, really wanted to do that and make that make that my accomplishment, I could say, screw all this. I'm going to go and be a world champion bowler, and I'm going to make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on bowling tournaments. Okay, I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in being free. That's a game, man. That is a game, ladies and gentlemen. This is what people are more interested in, what their sports team in their city does, rather than whether their rights are being violated. This is how crazy of a society we have become. And then people say, oh, there's too much emotion in your voice. Yeah, because you're not supposed to be upset about being a slave. No. You're supposed to get upset when your team loses in your city. Oh, it's your team. We did good today. Yeah, we did? Really? Oh, you made the team, huh? Wow. Congratulations. That's impressive. I mean, this is how retarded human beings are in the 21st century. Really. This is how retarded they are. And that's your average person that calls himself a man. That imbecile calls himself a man. Dares to use the word in application to himself. You know, that's all I have to say.
It's all part of an enslavement. How can you make it an offence to offend? Being offended is subjective. What offends me might not offend you. Being offended has everything to do with your moral conditioning, your religious beliefs, your experience in life. You know, I'm offended when I see boy bands. It's a valid offence. I'm offended. They're corporate whores posing as musicians to further a modelling career, and frankly, I'm fucking disgusted. Yeah. What am I going to do? Call the cops? Hello, it's me again. They're on the telly. 5 of them this time. Yep, white suits dancing like fags, that's them. 5 minutes, I'll be at the front traumatised. Bye. I'm offended every day I wake up on this fucked up earth. I'm offended when I see sports fans. Not all of them, but, you know, the ones I mean. Usually offended that I'm the same species. Sports fans. Fuck, the most socially accepted form of retardedness after religion. You know the ones I mean, you must have seen them. Do you like them, do you? The ones that are shirtless, arm in arm, with their faces painted green, wandering around eating chips, pissing all over your city, singing their stupid fucking songs as if we all want to hear their barbaric war cry of spastics. Really? And I'm supposed to share equal rights with these fucking skid marks? Well, I can't do that, because it's impossible to be equal to something you're superior to. Understand? You can't be superior if everyone is equal. No, everybody's equal, and that you're the physical manifestation of life force, but how you behave once you're born, well, fuck me dead, there's superiority, I'll fucking tell you. And there's people on the earth superior to me, and if I'm lucky enough to meet them, I become enlightened.
And when you come back here from living in the third world, you're struck immediately by a lot of things. Of course, the first thing that strikes you is the Nazis that look at your passport. Unlike people anywhere else in the world, you travel around, people smile, they welcome you. You know, I've just driven the length of Mexico, and every soldier or policeman I talk to was happy to see me. Smiled, didn't bother me, welcomed me. When I get back to the United States a few days ago, I'm met by a guy who looks as if he'd like to cut my throat. And he didn't. Okay, that's good. But if you spend much time traveling around across borders, you see that when people enter the United States, they're treated like garbage. Stand in Miami, stand in Houston. Watch how people from Latin America are treated. It's a travesty. Everybody who travels around notices this. You can go to China and get a better reception than you get in the United States. It's because people here live in fear. They live in fear of everything. Americans are afraid of their shadows. They're afraid of Islamic terrorists that don't pose a 1 in a million chance of hurting them. They're afraid of their children falling off the slide in the park. They're afraid if they let the children out of their sight, the children will be taken away by maniacs. They're afraid of everything. They're afraid. And fear-driven people cannot think straight. They can be entertained, however, so that's the kind of country we have here. A massively entertained, hyper-fearful bunch of people who will sit still for a police state. Not my kind of place.
The role of culture in the lives of societies has changed in the 20th century. We all live too long now to be duped by culture in the way that previous populations were. You know, if the average member of a population only lives to age 40, the cultural con can go on and on and on. But if you give people lifespans into the 80s, then they get 40 years to think about what they went through between 0 and 40, and eventually they'll figure out just who and what screwed them. And when they do, they are not going to be very happy with the cultural values that they attempted to come to terms with and work through. I was thinking about how I would talk about this tonight, and though we've been talking about these kinds of ideas in the staff teaching all week, I didn't realize till this afternoon what a frontal assault this concept is on one of the most cherished notions that has flourished around this place, which is the idea of the inner child. And I realized that really what I was about was not the inner child, but a quite different program, overcoming culturally induced neoteny. Neoteny is a biological phenomenon that we will also this weekend talk about as a sociological phenomenon. Neoteny is the retention of juvenile characteristics into adulthood. It's a strategy in biology. For instance, our hairlessness is a neonatal trait, evolutionarily speaking. All primates are born hairless, but we retain this into adulthood. The ratio of our skull to our torso in adult human beings is a fetal ratio when compared to other primates. And I'm fascinated by the question, and Dennis and I got into an argument in our hotel room because we both spoke at a conference a week ago where I said this, and he said, well, is all culture have this infantile and juvenilizing property, or is there something specifically pathological about Western culture? And at first I was willing to argue that all culture does this, makes children of its members. But I think to some degree it's true that all culture is somewhat unfriendly to the individual. When their heavy arm falls on your shoulder and they tell you that you're going to be sent off to some foreign hellhole to kill people as a young man, you definitely suddenly get the notion that culture is not your friend. But perhaps, if you're a 12-year-old boy in an Amazonian tribe and they announce that now it's time for the 2-week abandonment in the woods, from which if you live to tell the tale, you'll become a full member of society, I'm not sure those kids greet that with a leap of joy in their hearts. It's like, oh my God, now this, we knew it was coming. Culture is a plot to keep you childish, to keep you dependent, to keep you deluded, to keep your eyes fixed where they shouldn't be, on goals that are trivial, demeaning, ultimately unsatisfying. I don't know how we can directly reverse this except by a concentrated effort to examine our first premises and grow up. And it's there's a lot of youth bashing that goes on in this culture. We're told that the Gen Xers are shiftless, druggy, gender confused, so forth and so on. This rap against neoteny is not directed at youth. They are young. They have that excuse. You only get it once in your life, but you should use it as often as possible because it will soon be pulled from your grip. But it's preposterous for middle-aged people and people past middle age to try and use this same out. What is their excuse for their childishness, their cluelessness, their fetishes, addictions, and intellectual shortcuts that flatten and simplify the world and turn it into an epistemological cartoon? I mean, it's sloppy thinking. It means that you're actually in flight from the richness of experience.
St. Paul said that the laborer is worthy of his hire. And I, as a philosopher, mere philosopher, dealing in higher things, always insist that I be paid for my work. And I get the highest fee I can get. And people say, well, you're just out for money. I say, that's none of your business, because I give most of it away. My own needs being extremely simple. Although I enjoy good food, I don't even own a television set. And, it's a very simple life, but I've got enough. And enough is as good as a feast. You see, a lot of people don't feel happy unless they have another thing beyond money, which is called status. And status, to a very large extent in our economy, consists in conspicuous consumption. In having this thing and that thing and the other thing, in having a swimming pool, a Ferrari, a certain kind of clothes, and a certain kind of house with an enormous round-style picture window, and so on and so on and so on. And we think we need all that, because we've been persuaded by a certain kind of propaganda that that's how we ought to live. Because we haven't asked ourselves whether that was what we really wanted. In other words, we've been propagandized into thinking what we wanted. I remember my daughter, when she was in high school, number one daughter, who's now become very sensible, insisted that she had to have a certain number of cashmere sweaters. In those days, I couldn't afford them. I said, my dear, do you really want these? Or is it just that you've been reading ads in the magazine or listening to the other children? Because you see, schools are places where you send your child to be brought up by other children. And therefore they get a kind of lowest common denominator of culture. So they all think they've got to have this, they've got to have that. And they don't really want it. If they sat back and considered Do I need all that? Is this trip really necessary? They would come to the conclusion that it wasn't. And that would be very important, because they would save energy.
When you look for guidance, direction, mentorship, we always look toward institutions. Well, I'll go to the university, or I'll go to the army, or I'll do something. Somebody will tell me, will give me a larger purpose. But it's really yourself that is the final arbiter. And if you keep yourself as the final arbiter, you will be less susceptible to infection by cultural illusion. Now, the problem with this is that it makes you feel bad to not be infected by cultural illusion, because it's called alienation. You know, but this is, I can't solve all problems. The reason we feel alienated is because the society is infantile, trivial, and stupid. So the cost of sanity in this society is a certain level of alienation. I grapple with this because I'm a parent. And I think anybody who has children, you come to this realization, you know, what'll it be? Alienated, cynical intellectual, or slack-jawed, half-wit consumer of the horse shit being handed down from on high? There is not much choice in there, you see, and we all want our children to be well-adjusted. It's, unfortunately, there's nothing to be well-adjusted to, so that's a real problem. What I noticed in going to the Amazon and Indonesia and these places is that the person you want to get to is the shaman. But the shaman is different from everybody else. Like when you go into an Amazonian tribe that's way upriver or something, the people behave the way you would expect naive, untraveled people to behave. They want to touch your Gore-Tex and, you know, look at your camera and look through the binoculars and fiddle with the can opener and all this. No shaman would ever stoop to such behavior. A shaman knows that cultures are provisional and is interested in you as a person. The other people don't even see you as a person because you're huge, white, strange smelling, and incomprehensible. The shaman sees you as a person, and it's because he is alienated. The reason shamans can do their magic is because they are outside the belief system. I really think that that's true. Everyone else believes, you know, that the guy in the other village can send the mojo and mess with you. The shaman knows that that's not quite how it works. And so then he, as it were, can go behind the board and fix the cultural TV that everybody else is just watching. So I think alienation, extra-environmentalism, shamanism, whatever you want to call it, is simply individualism in the context of cultures that don't value individualism. And cultures don't. You know, it's said nature acts to preserve the species. Cultures act to preserve the illusions of the population. They're not interested in you if you're an Einstein or a Jackson Pollock, or unless they can fit you in to the pre-established systems of commerce and canons of aesthetic order and so forth and so on. And then that's called being civilized.
And one thing that I would like to specifically pick up on, because I think it is specifically important for the theme of today's episode, is to note that the habits and opinions and the thoughts and the actions of the masses, the proletariat, were in fact very inconsequential to the structure and the perpetuation of the system of hierarchy. In fact, they didn't really care what the masses thought because it was of so little consequence that it could be seen to not matter. And I think that's also demonstrable in our day and age, where it is very true that a vast majority of the population basically takes themselves out of the realm of thinking conscious actors in this war for consciousness, which we are identifying, by simply abdicating all of their responsibilities and refusing to think about any of these subjects, and instead well, amusing themselves with endless diversions that have absolutely no consequence whatsoever.
Hold on a minute. You're calling me?
I am.
You stuck-up precious little bitch. Let me tell you something.
Oh boy, here we go.
Listen to me.
I met a devil woman. She took my heart away.
Easiest yes so far today.
Absolute yes.
Yes, 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 honey.
Julie, you have 4 yeses.
Oh my gosh.
Congratulations.
And in contrast to those who are endlessly fascinated by such tawdry material, there are the people who I guess we could identify as the party members of our current day and age, who are at least people who are thinking and conscious and involved in some way in the system, or at the very least participating in the system. And the system itself remains something that itself is very, very nebulously defined and operates largely behind the scenes in such a way that those who are serving its interests generally don't even understand it, in the exact same way that Orwell was laying out in that earlier passage. So we can think, for example, of the teachers who are involved in the day-to-day process of implementing these educational institutions that are dreamt up by the Wundtians and the Rockefellers and all of those that were identified in that earlier article in today's podcast. These teachers are doing this on a day-to-day basis, but they may have absolutely no idea, and in fact generally probably don't have any idea about the philosophical background and the historical background of what they're doing, or the ideas of how this was funded into existence by certain families for the betterment of their own self-interest. I think that's something that we can understand. Many teachers have no idea how they slot into this much, much bigger understanding of what's really happening in this whole system and the indoctrination that is taking place through them and to the children. And once again, this is not necessarily to condemn those teachers. It's to say that they themselves have been fed into this system, and they are the cogs that make one small part of that system function. And it is a fascinating thing to behold, and of course something that we must do our best to confront and to shake people, not of course simply teachers, but people like that in those positions in society who are involved with shaping the conscious habits and opinions of the masses. Well, we have to find a way of reaching those people who can have that effect, who can take this up, who can be shown that the system that they are serving has these internal contradictions, exactly as the Big Brother police state that Orwell was writing about had, and that once we actually start to examine it, we can once again realize that self-agency, the will, individualism are the types of things that we want to foster once again in our society so that we can overcome this collective oligarchical decision-making, which inevitably leads us towards these neo-humanist and transhumanist shapings of our future and the guiding of us into as we sleepwalk into this transhumanist nightmare that they're laying out for us.
The medium is the message means that the medium is the thing which is making the difference. In every discussion you ever hear since the 60s about TV, for example, is it good, is it bad, terrible, wonderful, the discussion hinges around what's on TV. And people say, well, television is terrible, it just shows violence. And then somebody else says, no, television is wonderful, those nature shows and news from far away and masterpiece theater. This is a stupid argument. What McLuhan meant by the media is the message is he meant that it doesn't matter what you put on TV. TV is TV. It has an intrinsic nature, and whether you're showing National Geographic specials or slasher movies, TV will do what it does. It has certain qualities, just like driving a car or skiing. Certain muscles are going to be exercised, certain perceptual systems enhanced, others suppressed. And it's very hard for us to understand this because we have accepted this media so thoroughly into our life. But in fact it is shaping our value systems in ways that are very hard for us to suspect or even detect. I mean, television, for example, it's a drug. It has a series of measurable physiological parameters that are as intrinsically its signature as the parameters of heroin are its signature. I mean, you sit somebody down in front of a TV set and turn it on, 20 minutes later come back, sample their blood pressure, their eye movement rate, blood is pooling in their rear end, their breathing takes on a certain quality, the stare reflex sets in. I mean, they are thoroughly zoned on a drug. And when you think about the fact that the average American watches 6.5 hours of television a day, imagine if a drug had been introduced in 1948 that we all spent 6.5 hours per day on average watching. And the one thing about drugs in their defense is that it's very hard to diddle the message. A drug is a mirror, but television isn't a mirror. Television is a billboard, and anybody who pays their money can put their message into the trip. This is an extraordinarily insidious situation. What McLuhan wanted to become, I think, was the founder of a general new sophistication about media. And he was essentially parodied to death by, guess what? Media. They made of him an icon of cultural incomprehensibility. Not since Einstein have you been so pre-programmed in advance to believe you ain't going to understand this guy. And that's what they said about McLuhan, and consequently his message and his insight failed. We will have to reinvent McLuhan around the turn of the century, because we are producing forms of media of such interactive power and potential social impact that we're going to have to go back and rethink all of this.
Are you for gun control?
Yeah.
Who should control the guns?
Who should control the guns? Probably the government.
Do you trust the government?
No.
You don't trust the government, but you want them to control the gun? Okay, do you, so you're for gun control?
Oh, by far. In fact, I will say repeal the Second Amendment.
Do you trust the government?
Well, but who? No.
Who should control the guns?
Who should control the guns? I say get rid of all the guns.
Right. Who should be the ones to do that? If we don't trust the government can't be trusted. Who's left to control the guns?